All right, I think you have your notes in front of you. We are, at long last, at the last chapter of Zechariah, and so many things have waited for this moment to reveal themselves, and so it's still exciting. It's still a very, very fun book. So if you're new with us or recent with us, we spent a lot of time in this book. We're in the last section of the book, and the last section is really all about what traditionally we call Armageddon, the Battle of Armageddon. I don't like the phrase the Battle of Armageddon because it's not a battle, it's a war. It's 3.5 years, intense, and it's multiple battles, it's multiple attacks, multiple waves. But the Bible talks about the day of the Lord. All of the tribulational season is the day of the Lord. The Great Tribulation, some people like to put that as the second 3.5 years. I call it all the Great Tribulation because it's going to be bad the whole time. But the day of Jacob's trouble is a biblical way to refer to this, the second half of the tribulation, because during that second half, Antichrist breaks his covenant with Israel. He begins attacking Israel improper, and he attacks them systematically all the way until Christ returns to free them. So we've been looking at that. Chapter 12, we saw how that day begins. It begins with God protecting them. He's going to make it so that the weakest among them is like David. Whoever tries to lift that stone will hurt themselves. But then God's going to back away. He's going to allow Israel to start going through very, very serious travail. And that troubles a lot of us, but this is God's way. And this is the prophetic template. He's told them this from Moses' time. You follow me, I'm going to bless you, I'm going to honor you. You follow other gods, I'm going to thrust you into tribulation. You're going to be hauled off by other people. And then when you've been there a while, you'll call back to me. I will restore you. That's the template from Moses all the way through, over and over again. And so Zechariah's writing at the time of the return from Babylon. They know the template. They are now on the receiving end of having been restored. They're back in the land. They're rebuilding the temple. First several chapters of Zechariah are all about encouraging them to do that. So Zechariah then in chapter 9 goes into the coming of the Messiah, the rejection of the Messiah. He starts prophesying a latter falling away. He prophesies a latter day scattering and regathering of them. And of course, that's all connected to Messiah. They came, Messiah came. They rejected him as the prophets said they would. Jesus in Matthew 13 began a parabolic ministry after in chapter 12 saying they had committed the unpardonable sin for saying that his miracles were done through the power of demons rather than him being the Messiah. The rest, as they say, is history. One of the last things Jesus said publicly to Jerusalem was in Matthew 23. He said, I've longed to gather you under my wings like a hen gathers her chicks, but you are unwilling. He says, look, I leave your house desolate, or your house is desolate. A few days later, he's hanging on a cross. He says, it is finished. Veil in the temple rips in two from top to bottom, and it was finished. And the house was desolate. The temple's been desolate ever since. 40 years later is the Judeo-Roman War, the end of that generation after Jesus departed and went back to the Father. We have the 3-year, roughly, the first of several Judeo-Roman uprisings. Rome crushes Israel, burned the temple to the ground, displaced the entirety of the nation. The nation is gone. There is no Israel from that point. There's a Roman province. Later it's battled for by Muslims. Later it's battled for by Crusaders. Then Muslims again. Then Crusaders battled again. Then Muslim. And long story short, that piece of real estate has been fought over all through human history, but only in 1948 did it become Israel. Israel became Israel again, also prophesied, even here in Zechariah. He's going to gather them back. He has been gathering them back. Ezekiel explicitly says he's going to gather them back for the purposes of their final judgment. That's what Zechariah has been teaching us. So we are now at the time of their final judgment. In the beginning of that 3.5 years, they're going to be strong. Then chapter 12 jumps to the end of that time. I'm going to pour out a spirit of grace and prayer on them. They're going to look at the one they pierced. This is written hundreds of years before Romans even invented crucifixion. Psalm likewise. Psalm 22 is all about the crucifixion. That was written 1,000 years before Rome invented crucifixion. So we had it prophesied about this piercing of the Messiah long before it happened, but we're told that here. They're going to look at the one they pierced, mourn for him as one mourns an only child, weep for him as one weeps for a firstborn. And that day, the great mourning, each family all to their own, is going to be happening. And then we roll into chapter 13. And trying to scroll my notes faster here so I can get to that text. We see the cleansing of the land as soon as I get there. On that day, I'm going to remove the names of the idols. The people who still prophesy in the name of idols are going to be stabbed by their own parents, because Israel's going to be turning to the Lord. And by turning to the Lord, they're turning to Christ. They're turning to their Messiah. And so we had the poetic recap last week, and that's the middle of 13. Awake sword against my shepherd, against the man who's my associate. And again, that phrase in the Hebrew means my equal. This is one of many Old Testament places that speak of the divinity of Messiah. And strike the shepherd, the sheep will be scattered. In the whole land, he said, 2/3 will be cut off and die, but 1/3 will be left in it. I will put this third through the fire. I will refine them as silver and test them as gold. They will call on my name, and here's the best phrase in the whole book, and I will answer them. Cue Revelation 19. Jesus on a white horse, sword out of the mouth, tattoos on the thigh. It's on like Donkey Kong. They're going to get to the end of that, calling on the Lord when the last Jewish person comes to their salvation, or the last one is cut off, however that works out between the 2/3 that get cut off and the 1/3 that make it, the Lord comes. So we are today in chapter 14 there. I've preached through eschatology numerous times with you in different approaches. When you're preaching eschatology, it's like every other systematic theology. It's like every other story. There's a beginning, a middle, and the end. There are highs and lows. There's conflict. But the moment of all moments is the moment when it's a climax. And oftentimes, your climax moment in a story is the solving of the conflict. Not always, but a lot of times it is. And this is the climactic moment of world history, honestly, of world history, but especially of the study of eschatology. And so you're looking at your notes. You notice I capitalized and italicized the word the day of the Lord. We talk about the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is generally a season. It's 7 years, according to Daniel. It is a season. The word yom in the Hebrew, like day in English, means a day or that day or in my day, like Dad would say. It could be a season. It could be a 24-hour period. We are now narrowed down to the day. The day. All of the tribulation is the day of the Lord, but we are now looking at the specific, literal 24-hour day when the Lord returns. And so we're going to be looking at that the next couple of weeks. So our summary thus far is in verse 1 and 2. Look, a day belonging to the Lord is coming, when the plunder taken from you will be divided in your presence. So we've been looking at Israel's spiritual renovation, their salvation, their spiritual salvation. Now we're returning back to their physical salvation, their tangible, real body salvation as it is. They've been spiritually converted now. Now the Lord returns to be the king over his people. That's where we are. So hine is the word look, behold, the idea, and that often comes prophetically to say, pay attention here. Jesus did something likewise, and he would say, verily I say to you, pay attention to this, a day belonging to the Lord, an obvious day of the Lord usage. There are hundreds of these. They always refer to the tribulation. But what follows here is unique because we've been talking about the season, but now we're looking specifically at the actual day that fulfills the season. This is, I put in your notes, like the last scene of the movie when it's all been done and you finally get that final punch. The dragon falls, the dust is smoking, the hero's standing when the dust settles. That's where we stand. This is my favorite part of this. So on that day, when the plunder taken from you will be divided in your presence. The word plunder is shalal, and it literally refers to the spoils of war. The idea of plunder during this season up to this day, they have been plundered through this war. But I think it's a bigger picture than that. Israel having been plundered, they were plundered before they were scattered. They've been plundered, often enough throughout history. This is bigger than this battle or this war being ended. This is really all that Israel's had to endure for their disobedience more than any other reason, sort of being made right now that they've come to their repentance and God being good and gracious to them. So the promise is on this day, it's all going to be right. And the idea is the king's returning. That's what verse 8 is going to tell us. The king's going to return, and he's going to take back what has been stolen from them. And he says it'll be divided in your presence. That means that we're going to be here together. I'm going to redole it all out. Now, there's more about this plunder in other prophetic texts that we don't see in Zechariah. Joel 3, we're going to refer to a few times tonight, Joel 3, because it's an important core. There are a lot of corollaries to this text biblically, but Joel 3 talks about the people at that time having cast lots for God's people, selling them into slavery, bartering a boy for a prostitute and a girl for wine. So grabbing a hold of a young Jewish child trying to flee and selling them to their enemy for a prostitute so they could be, who knows, killed or worse. And so this plundering of them is going to be made right. We see the situation in verse 2. What's going to happen? Well, he's going back. We already know this has already been going on. He says, I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem for battle. So he's going back, reiterating again is sort of our summary thus far. We're still in that. So the idea of I will gather all nations, there are two important things there. Number one, we need to remember that the day of the Lord is the day of the Lord. A lot of people look at the tribulation as the day of Satan. Satan is allowed to go haywire. God still restrains him. He still has limitations. God does allow Satan to corrupt humanity that is corrupt, allows him to do horrible things. But all the judgments of the day of the Lord are God's. And we in the modern age tend to think of Jesus too much like Vacation Bible School Jesus. And we fixate on God's grace, and we fail to understand that God is also a righteous judge. And judgment is righteous. By the way, Sunday is Gospel Sunday in our church, and I've decided I'm going to approach the gospel. I do it, change it up here and there. It's always the gospel, but I'm going to do a systematic Gospel Sunday this Sunday, and that's going to be one of the bullet points of my sermon Sunday, is God is a righteous judge. And a righteous judge, when someone breaks the law and is brought before his court, does what? He throws the book at him. Yeah. He says, here's what you did. Here's the penalty for your offense. Next. That's what a righteous judge does. And a righteous judge, if the thing happens, and he looks up and he goes, Mom, why are you here? What did you do? And he says, get out of here. Case dismissed. You're going to stand in the back and say, that's an unrighteous judge. Just because it was his mama, she broke the law, she hurt one of my loved ones, and this unrighteous judge is just going to let her pass because she's his mama? No, a righteous judge is a righteous judge, and God is a righteous judge. He loves us. He loves us as his own, more than we love our mamas. But the day's going to come when time's out, the last grain of sand falls through the neck of that little sand clock. Couldn't think of the word. And it's Judgment Day. And on Judgment Day, judgment comes. And this is a season of judgment, the day of the Lord. So he's going to be judging people, but yet while he's judging people, he's calling them to repentance, and people will be coming to repentance. There'll be a lot of people saved during the day of the Lord. But it's going to be for the second half, particularly the gathering of all the nations against Jerusalem for battle. He is at this point dealing with Israel. We don't see a lot going on specifically in Israel in the first half of the tribulation. We see seal judgments, we see the trumpet judgments, but when we get to the second half, it's very oriented around Israel and Israel's salvation. And so I believe that probably Gentiles are saved in the second half. I believe Jews are saved in the first half. But it seems that the second half is uniquely about Armageddon. It's about Israel going through their final restorative judgment, if you will. And so that's what we have here. And so I want you to notice who gathers the nations. God does. I will gather the nations. God's going to bring this on. This isn't just because the nations are evil and they want to come against Israel. They are and they do. This isn't just because Satan hates Israel and wants to destroy them. He is and he does. But God is allowing these people to go. It's like Dad's been holding the bully back. And finally he says, go ahead. And he keeps the leash in the back of his neck. That's far enough. Far enough. But it's God who does this. I want you to notice the word nations here. There are several words we've talked about for nations. This is goyim, the plural of goy, which means Gentiles. Every Gentile nations. And it says all the nations. It is every nation. By the way, that's going to include, if we're still around, the United States. People ask me about American prophecy. And I hear people say things about American prophecy, but the fact that people say things don't mean the Bible says it, because I've searched and studied, and I don't see us active in Bible prophecy. Not saying we won't be. If we're there, we're going to be one of the nations coming against Israel. If we're not there, it's going to be because maybe we've been destroyed, maybe we've become irrelevant, maybe we stay out of it, maybe we're at a point in our history and the pendulum in America swings. You know, it swings. We go far to the right, and we go far to the left, and we go, and by the way, it keeps going to the middle, and somehow they've leaned the whole building right, and somehow it goes a little bit more right every time. But the pendulum's always moving, and we're going to get to a point, perhaps, where we just don't care what's going on in the world. We may see America in the Gog-Magog War in Ezekiel 38. Possibly Tarshish and our islands refers to Western democracies and the democracies they've spawned, which would include us. But our entire action, if that's us there, all we do is look at this Russian-led invasion and go, shame on you, and we don't lift a finger to stop it. If that is indeed us. But if we're still around, this includes us. All non-Jewish nations, which is every nation other than Israel against Israel, the whole world against Israel. We saw this in 12:2, and it's inferenced many times in prophecy. But here we're told very articulately the whole world is against Israel, and particularly Jerusalem, as we've been discussing. So we continue and we see some new details. It says the city will be captured. That's new. The houses looted, women raped. Half the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be removed from the city. So first of all, we see the city captured. We didn't know the city was going to be captured. From reading earlier in chapter 12, you would think that the city was going to be spared. And God did supernaturally preserve them. But in the end, they will be captured. Part of that capture is probably the lead up to this pillaging that he spoke of is going to be restored. We saw in the poetic recap last week, 2/3 of the population are going to die. Only a third are going to be refined as silver and gold and be brought to salvation. And here we see this process in chapter 12 telling us more how that comes to be. The city will be captured. Lakad, it means taken. It's a word that's used for the trapping of wild animals. So captured as in captured. There's no escape. And it means what you think it means. They're actually going to conquer Jerusalem before the end. So the idea that Jerusalem will never be conquered, not a biblical idea. It will right at the end. It's going to be conquered and then pretty much immediately freed, but it will be conquered. The houses looted. Again, we talked about the spoils. This looting here is probably, that's a big part of that. The women raped. Yeah, that means what you think it means. That's an unfortunate byproduct of godless warfare and has been for as long as men have conquered cities. Is it wrong? Of course it's wrong. But is it wrong to go in and kill people? Yeah, it's all wrong. So, yeah, that's there. It's stated without an apology. That's just going to be part of it. Half the city will go into exile. I don't like the English exile here. It's good, it's accurate, but the Hebrew is golah, and it means captivity. Now, when we talk about the Babylonian exile, we understand that was a captivity. You were hauled off into Babylon. We call it the exile. But when you think of exile, it's too easy to think of, we put him in exile. Well, he's not a slave. He just run off from here. And so it's not run off from here kind of exile. It is the idea of they were carried away into slavery. And that's probably the best word to be used there in the English, is the half of them will go into slavery. King James says half the city will be taken. Young's literal, gone forth half the city in a removal. But again, it's the idea of them being captured, hauled off, and either put to death or put into slavery. So half of the city is gone. The other half remain in the city. As the city's captured, they'll still be trapped there. Now, this group is going to experience the rescue in the end. But I put a note here. Now, I've heard people teach through this and say, these are the 1/3 that were saved. We don't know that. If some of the 1/3 that were saved is probably, most of the 1/3, some of them won't be in the city at all. Some of the ones that remain in the city might still yet die. So these are distinct statements. 2/3 of all of the Jews are going to be destroyed. 1/3 are going to be converted. At the end, half the city is hauled off and half stays. Those are two different sets of facts. How they relate to each other, we don't know exactly. But we see that they're going to be carried into slavery at this time, and the rest are going to be there until the end comes upon them. And that's going to be, if you got to live through this, and you get to live through this, it's really both. You have to, but if you have to, you get to. And if you get to be there that day, it's going to be something to see. As I understand eschatology, you and I are going to have box seats for all of this. And I love the box seats. Once in my life, I went to a professional football game. One of our church members, organization had a booth. And he said, you want to go to see the Texans? Heck yeah, I do. JJ was hurt back when JJ was playing. I'd love to have watched him play. He threw some footballs. But the best thing about that game was we sat around and ate little corn dogs and chips. And it was just the coolest little, it's like a little clubhouse, It's just a buffet. And they just kept bringing more food. And all you want to eat. I ate, like, especially in football concession terms, I must have eaten $200-300 worth of food. And I'm sure they got the money out of whoever owned that box. But we're going to be eating little hot dogs while all this is going on. Okay, we get box seats from heaven. We're going to be watching with bated breath, And, this is going to be, because we know what's coming. We've been told. But to be on the ground, suffering, crying over your dead loved ones, mourning over the destruction of your city, fearful of your life, and then to hear this gosh awful reckoning of a sound and look southeast and see this glow coming and this light probably doing like that and smoke coming up, and what Zechariah is going to describe to us in a week or two when he talks about how that's going to look for the enemies of Christ. To be able to see that, I can't imagine a bigger climax to be in that story. So here we go. The Lord enters the battle personally. Verse 3, we see his arrival. Then, that's the vav. Then could be then, it could be and. In this case, then makes the most sense. It seems like it's consecutive. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as he fights on a day of battle. Lord here is Jehovah. It is God's proper name. It is common that in messianic prophecies in the Old Testament, referring to Christ, referring to Messiah, he's called Jehovah. That does not muddy the distinction between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Jehovah is God. Jesus is God. Holy Spirit is God. The Father is God. They are God, one God in three persons. And yes, that'll make your head explode if you think about it too long. We can't really grasp that. But who wants to worship a God you can fully grasp? So I'm okay with that. So Jehovah here, his proper name is what he's called. He's going to go out and fight. Lacham is the word, and that means fight in a military sense. He's going to take up arms. It means to make war against. And of all the things that it can be said that God's going to do to you, I would not ever want to hear God is going to make war against you. The author of Hebrews says, it's a terrible thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And that's what this day is going to be. And the root term of that word, lacham, means to consume or to devour. The idea of this fighting is an overwhelming force that consumes its enemy. He's going to come out and fight as he fights on a day of battle. Every hero story you've ever seen, Hercules walks out and just decimates them all, you know. Nothing can compare to the idea of God fighting as he fights on a day of battle. We're going to be shown a picture of it. A truly fearsome thought. God himself is warring against these enemies, and as it's described later, the panic in their eyes, they're going to turn on each other trying to get out of there. It's truly going to be fearsome. And so what we're seeing here is this concurs with Revelation 19. Let's jump over there. Then I saw heaven opened, and there was a white horse. Its rider is called Faithful and True, and with justice he judges and makes war. His eyes were like a fiery flame, and many crowns were on his head. He had a name written that no one knows except himself. He wore a robe dipped in blood, from Isaiah 63, and his name is called the Word of God. This is Jesus. The armies that were in heaven followed him on white horses, wearing pure white linen, but Isaiah 63 says, I alone struck down the nations. From the nations no one was with me. He does this by himself, all the armies of heaven, and I believe we're there on our little ponies too. I think we're following. I think we're in that great cloud behind him, and we don't lift a finger. We just watch. Right? The box seat's over. We get to mount up now and ride down with Jesus, I believe. So a sharp sword comes from his mouth so that he might strike down the nations with it. He will rule them with an iron rod. He will trample the winepress of the fierce anger of God the Almighty. He has a name written on his robe and on his thigh, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So we see Zechariah 14, Revelation 19, speaking directly about the return of Christ to militarily rescue and save and establish his kingdom. From there, we go to his judgment. We're going to learn more about this war later, and it's something. As Christ returns, and by the way, this isn't in your notes, but when we go through Return of the King and we do a deep dive into eschatology, Micah tells us that from Basra, it'll be visible from the east. Somewhere east of Basra, the Lord is first seen. Basra is in southern Jordan. If you've ever heard of the place called Petra, that's Basra. Like sheep of Basra, the believers are going to be protected there. Matthew 24, he says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, head to the mountains. That's what they'll do. From the mountains in Jerusalem, you're going to go into Jordan. Jordan in Daniel, when Antichrist makes his war with the world, there are three old nations that he does not capture: Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Ammon is northern Jordan, Moab is central Jordan, Edom is southern Jordan. The country of Jordan, as we know it today, is Edom, Moab, and Ammon, roughly. For whatever reason, Jordan doesn't get conquered, and that's where they flee. And they end up in Edom. Isaiah talks about this, several places talk about this. I don't have time tonight to go into that, but that's where the elect who listen to Jesus' words and flee, when they see this start in the midpoint of the tribulation, when they see the armies around Jerusalem, they flee. They're going to be protected. They're going to be fed by ravens. It's super stuff. And so that group that's been preserved in Jordan is going to be the first group to see Christ in Micah. They see him, he passes overhead, and then from there he's going to go up toward Jerusalem. There are going to be armies trying to get to those in Edom. Christ is just going to sweep through and destroy them systematically. He's going to work his way to Jerusalem. He's going to destroy those armies. He is going to destroy every military combatant. And what about the non-military combatants? That's coming next. But he destroys every military combatant. Now back to verse 4. I'm telling you this because these are, we have multiple sources teaching us the full story of eschatology. Zechariah doesn't teach us everything. Revelation doesn't teach us everything. Nobody teaches everything. They all teach us pieces. We have to put the pieces together to get the whole story. So that was just a little piece of prophetic history that fits in between verse 3 and 4. Verse 4 says, on that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. He has returned in the sky. He has seen. The sword is destroying the armies. He comes over Edom, up through Jerusalem. I picture him coming across Temple Mount, maybe down the Kidron Valley. I'm going to show you a map in a second, and up to the Mount of Olives. And it says, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. Tim, if you'll put that on the screen. I don't usually do screen things on Wednesday night. I love screen things, but they can be distracting as much as they can be helpful. But I thought, I put that on your paper. I thought it'd be easier to see up here. So right here, that's Temple Mount. That big square is what Herod blew up from the original temple area and improved the temple, made it bigger. The temple sat right here until 70 AD when it was destroyed. The Muslims built the Dome of the Rock. Now, why do Muslims care about that piece of property? I'm going to get into a political thing here. They care about it because the Jews care about it. Just that's the truth. They say that, and by the way, under that dome, dead center under that dome, is the highest point of Mount Moriah. And the Jews believe that that's where Abraham laid Isaac. And they believe several things about that place, but that's the key. Most importantly, that is where the Holy of Holies of the temple sat, right there. And you walked into the temple, and this is bigger than it looks. That looks like a little thing. It's bigger than our church property. And so when you put the temple in the middle of it, you would go through the outer courts, and you go to the court of the Gentiles, and you would go into the holy place, and the most holy place is right at that rock. In the Dome of the Rock, there is a rope going around the top of Mount Moriah, the place the Jews believe Abraham laid Isaac. You can see the rock, the top of the rock there. It's under glass. You can't, but people can. And so that exact spot is where the Holy of Holies was. So for all of the ages the temple stood, the blood of Yom Kippur was spilt right there. So it's very, very important real estate to the Jews. They want to rebuild their temple, destroyed in 70 AD. It will be rebuilt by the time this happens. Where's it going to be rebuilt? Right there. There's nowhere else it's going to be rebuilt. It's going to be rebuilt right there. And the Holy of Holies is going to be right there. Now, when you leave Temple Complex, by the way, this big square is what I'm talking about, is this is the raised temple area. The big square would have been courts and everything else. And from, those of you who went with us last year, 2 years ago, whenever it was, we went up. When you ascend to Temple Mount right over here. This is the western wall. That's Wilson's Arch, it used to be. And these are the steps. And the mikvah I tell you about are all down here. Well, right here is the Kidron Valley. It curls around down here to the valley of... I hate I'm losing words these days. Y'all pray for my brain. Gehenna, the valley of Hinnom, what Jesus called hell, that valley's down here. And then right here, all of that area right there is the Mount of Olives. Now I want you to notice on the Mount of Olives, all of this white, it looks like a big old gravel driveway. But those who have been there know what that is. What is that? Solid graves. Not a stitch of grass. Those are grave after grave after grave. All of that is grave. Why? Because of this passage. The Jews understood from this passage, Messiah is going to come here. They believed that when Messiah come, he was going to usher in the resurrection of the dead prior to his coming. All of that's kind of true. I mean, they got like enough right to be dangerous, you know. They just didn't know that Messiah had already come once, and this is second coming. But at least they got some stuff right. And this is full of wealthy dead Israelites that could afford a plot at that location. So his feet standing on the Mount of Olives, he's going to be standing somewhere up here. We don't know where. The peak is right about where the Chapel of the Ascension is, right up in here. I think it's right here. And it's nothing in Israel is as big as you expect, being from Texas. It's just not. It's not big. I mean, I don't know how many acres that is. That may be 20 acres, the whole temple complex. And this whole area may be, I mean, some of you have property bigger than this. But it's big enough. Now, what's going to happen here is fascinating. So first of all, on that day, we have the definite article back. Earlier, we didn't have the definite article. I don't know that I pointed that out when I should have. I don't remember saying that out loud. A day is coming. And it wasn't a definite article. It just says day is coming. Here we have that day again. That is the definite article. It's the ha. It means the or that. And so from verse 1, this is the same day. This is the specific day. His feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. And let me get my computer screen working again. So you see the graves because they understood this is a place that's important for the coming of Messiah. So they buried their dead there for all this time. One other thing I want to point out is the Golden Gate. The Golden Gate. I thought it was the Lion's Gate. The Golden Gate, you can see a little cutout right there. That gate is where the Jews believe Messiah is going to enter the temple through. Why do they believe that? Not real sure. Maybe from this text, but from this text, he's going to be down here in Basra. He's going to swing up through here and go across. Maybe they picture him leaving that gate and coming back through that gate. I don't know. But Jews believed that gate was important. So as soon as the city fell into Muslim hands, they sealed that gate. Crusaders took the city and they opened it back up. Muslims took the city again and they sealed it again. And in 1541, Suleiman the Magnificent, if you want to call him that, I think that's a little much, but Suleiman sealed it permanently, and to this day, that gate is sealed. I've stood on the back side and looked across, some of you did, and looked across the gate there. That gate's sealed. I got news for you. Jesus is walking through that gate, it's going to open up. I don't care how sealed it is. It's made out of his dirt, and he'll make it do what he wants it to. But whether that gate's important or not, it's a part of the scene there. If he goes through there, he's going to walk through there without any encumbrance. So the Mount of Olives, it says, will be split in half from east to west, forming a huge valley, so that half the mountain moves to the north and half moves to the south. So again, picture it. This area, Jesus walks up here, the mountain splits and it goes north, and this half goes south. And what does that create? Gigantic valley. That's what you have between two big mountains, and the mountain splits in half. So now we go back to Joel 3. I told you it's corollary to this. In those days at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and take them to the valley of Jehoshaphat. I will enter into judgment with them there because of my people, my inheritance, Israel. The nations have scattered the Israelites in foreign countries and divided up my land. So that's all we're going to touch on Joel for now. But Joel introduces something brand new to history, the valley of Jehoshaphat. The idea of the valley of Jehoshaphat isn't an actual historical place until it was made one. Joel talks about the valley of Jehoshaphat. This is again connected to Zechariah, and the Jews have accurately determined, if you ask a Jew, where's the valley of Jehoshaphat, they know. It's right here somewhere. Now, they might have an exact point somewhere. In fact, it's fun to go Google up all the different ideas, but they know it's in here somewhere. Now, this is the Kidron Valley. That valley's eternal, as far as we know, probably from the flood. Nothing new there. But when this splits in two, Jehoshaphat's going to be all of this area, depending on how far south that thing goes and how far north that thing goes, and how far back Jesus fills with people. Joel talks about the valley of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat is a compound word. It is Jehosha, that's Jehovah, and Shaphat, which is to judge. The word means, Jehoshaphat is simply a Hebrew word meaning God judges, or depending on context and usage, God will judge, or the valley where God will judge. or the valley of God's judgment, if you will. It's simply the valley of God's judgment. Having never been a known location until it was called out, it's not an extant city or anything like that. So, what we're seeing here then, Zechariah tells us, this is going to split and make a big open area. Joel tells us on the same subject that this is the place where God's going to judge. Fast forward Matthew 25. When the Son of Man comes, verse 31, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he just cracked the sky, came over Basra, came up through Israel, got the angels behind him, were there on little ponies. He will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them from one another, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He'll put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. So to sit on his glorious throne puts Jesus right there, I'm going to guess. Does he have a throne? Does he bring one with him? Do the angels prepare one as he's cracking the sky? I don't know. But if Jesus is going to have a throne, don't forget who Jesus is. He's the God-man. That's who he is. He's always been the God-man. He's Israel's king. He's Israel's king, and he's God. He is the God-king. And the God-king is going to both rule and be worshipped on that piece of real estate for the next 1,000 years until history ends. And his throne is going to be there. Isaiah says that people will make pilgrimages to go, let us seat at the feet of the Lord and learn from him. Because he's going to be there. And to live on the earth in the kingdom period, after this tribulation is over, when Christ ascends and everything's done and the dust settles and he restores nature, there's so much more to eschatology than just the bad stuff, because he sets it all up for the future. And at that time, people will be able to journey and literally sit at Jesus' feet and say, Jesus, tell us about Armageddon. And he'd be like, oh, all right. So here's the thing, we'll get to learn from him. How cool will that be? So he's going to be there on Temple Mount on his throne. And from Temple Mount, the Kidron Valley, if you're on Temple Mount flat and you look across, you see the Mount of Olives. And it looks like it's right there. Of course, you see graves like everywhere. But there's a valley below you. You're up above that valley. This wall, this is built up. And from here to there, I'm guessing a couple 100 foot of rise. I don't know. But there's a definite drop. And so if all of this is gone and it's all at the same level as that, if Jesus sits on his throne on Temple Mount, he's able to look down, especially if his throne's a little elevated, and he's going to see a lot lower than parallel to Temple Mount. To Mount of Olives. He's going to be able to look down and see this great gathering of people. And as he described his return, he says that's where he's going to judge the sheep and the goats. By the way, that is one of the most misunderstood and mispreached passages in the New Testament. That Jesus is going to, at the end, gather all the people, separate the sheep and the goats, and the goats will go into hell. So far, so true. And the sheep will go into heaven? No. The sheep, he says, enter into your kingdom. This is the start of the kingdom period. The sheep are the ones that get to stay and repopulate the earth. They're the ones that kick off the Messianic kingdom. Everyone at that point, after the goats, the first group to go into the lake of fire, by the way, everybody else is still waiting until the end. That's at the end of Revelation. Everybody else goes. These guys go early and spend an extra 1,000 years there. But the sheep are going to be the ones that are going to populate the earth for the kingdom period. So the military are dead. We'll go through that. But every non-military person on the earth is going to be collected. Remember we were talking about Matthew 12 some weeks back? We were talking, I did that in here, but I also did it on Sunday morning at the start of our Reformation series. That Jesus told those parables, and he told the parable of the sower. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed his seed. And one of them, the seed was sown and the tares were sown. And when he told that story and the disciples didn't understand it, he said, the harvesters are angels and the harvest is the end of the age. And he said, they're going to gather up the wheat and bring it into my barn, and they're going to gather up the weeds and burn them. That's this. That's this. The end of the age is this day of the return of Christ, because that day starts the next age. That is the age of Messiah. Every Jewish person understood there's this age and there's the age of Messiah. The mystery kingdom was what happened when they rejected Messiah, and the gospel was turned over to Gentiles for so far 2,000 years. But every Jewish person understood the age of now and the age of Messiah. So the end of the age is the mystery kingdom age, and now that starts a new age. Okay, I'll stop there for good timing. We're out of time. Questions, comments?